All right, everybody, doing a oil change on a Honda Rancher automatic 4x4. Mine is a 2015 Honda TRX 420 FA1 Rancher. Now, supposedly they have 4 different versions of the exact same one, so you got to be very careful when you're getting the parts. So my suggestion to everybody is before you do your first oil change is to go to the place that you bought the vehicle at, or go to a place that sells them if you bought it from a person, and get the parts you're supposed to get the first time. After that, you'll be able to order the parts online at a much cheaper price, but the first time you want to make sure you get the correct parts. That's just the way it is, and you're probably going to pay 20 to 30% more. That's also just the way it is for the first time you do the oil change. Okay, on mine you got to take off the seat and you got to take off the side panels so you can get access to stuff. And on the right side, that's where you're going to change out the oil filter. This is the side paneling that came off. It came off in one piece. And as you can see, these are little things right here and these little things right there. They pop off real easy. There's no screws or bolts. If you've never done it before, you might want to ask someone who has, but they're actually quite easy to come off. Pretty self-explanatory. And you can see where they all pop off at. Just make sure when you're taking it off that you pay attention, so when you try to put it back on, it's not too difficult. On this side right here is the dipstick. I'm not going to be using it this time, but if you ever want to check your oil, it's on the left side, and you can see right there, that's the dipstick. And again, it's on the left side. I've already drained the oil out of mine, but the oil drain is right there underneath. I don't know if you can see it. Right there's the hole. And this is the screw that comes out. It's also got a washer, which they're going to try to charge you something called a crush pin or crush washer, or whatever it was called. You're probably not going to need one. All it is a washer, but they give it a fancy name and charge you like $3 or $4 for it. You could probably reuse the old one, but I went ahead and bought one just because it was my first time. The size I'm using on my model is, let's see if I can get it to focus, 17. Yours may be different, but mine's a 17. So you just unscrew it and dump it into a pan like this. Alright, my oil's pretty much emptied out, so now it's time to put it back on. So I'm just gonna screw it on right back, right there. Okay, I screwed it back on with my fingers, and then I used this, tightened it just snug, and then gave it 2 light snug turns, and that's about as far as I went. Although the paperwork supposedly says you're supposed to do 18 feet per pound with the torque, but I don't have a torque wrench, so I just went with my common sense. And those who've done stuff like this before know what that means. As you can see, they use 3.6 liters is what you're going to add to it. The engine oil you're using is the GN4 10W30, and it has to be specialty oil. It can't be the stuff that you put in your car, because it's got to do something with the wet transmission, wet clutch oil. I have no idea why they made it that way, but they did. So you can't use standard engine oil. You have to get specialty engine oil, and it costs about twice as much per liter. Okay, this is where you take off the oil filter. This is the wrench I'm using. It is a, I don't know if you can see, but it's a 10. See if I can. It's a 10. 10 is what you use. And supposedly there's a spring in the back, so you got to be careful when you're taking it off not to bust that spring. Just letting you know, it's a real tight squeeze on the bottom, so you will have to be pushing up against this. It'll bend, but you got to push on it while you're doing it. because it's just real tight. Same thing here, not as bad, but you will have to push up against this. It'll bend, don't worry about that. Once you do a few turns, they come right off. As you can see, they're very loose, at least mine are. Now if it's used, you may have to screw all the way, but mine's pretty new, so it came off pretty easy. All three screws are the same size, so you don't have to worry about what hole you put them back in when you're putting it back together. Apparently there was a lot more oil than I thought, so make sure you put a lot of toilet paper or paper towels down here. I should have put more down, so I did spill a little bit, not too much, but I mean, that can be all wiped off, and of course I have protection underneath. You can use cardboard or newspaper, but there's a lot more oil in there than I thought. So this is what it looks like. And there's the spring. Spring goes right there. The spring goes right here when you're putting it back in. And there's where the spring goes over that little thing there, and that goes on the inside. There's what it looks like on the inside. I don't see any moving parts or anything. There is also a rubber washer. You probably don't have to replace it, at least not this time, because it looks like this one's good. But I bought the rubber washer anyways, and you should lube it with oil. When you take this one off and put the new one on, you got to lube it with oil. But yeah, I replace them all the time. You probably don't have to, but I do. These are the parts I'm using. I use genuine parts. I'm sure they got generic ones, but I like to replace things with the original parts because, well, generic parts are generic and you get what you pay for. All right, make sure when you're putting it on, that right there, I don't know if you can see it, but that circle's got to go inside that spring. And when you're putting it in, you'll feel that it's in there. And it kind of wobbles a little bit, but what that's going to do is when you tighten it down, it's going to squish a little bit. But yeah, it's got that hole right there has got to go inside the spring. And the spring is loose, but it just fits right in that little hole right there. When you're putting this on, make sure you dip it in oil and lube it real good before you put it on the lip. I just dip it in the used motor oil, and then I put it on the first lip. It's real easy, it goes on real easy, but like I said, I just dip it in oil and rub my fingers through it all. When you're putting it back on, make sure the spring doesn't come off, so you kind of have to hold it just right when you're pushing it in. And then when you're putting it on, it doesn't go on perfectly, so you got that O-ring kind of sticks a little bit, so you got to kind of maneuver it on, and it finally pushes on with a little bit of pressure, but you'll feel it go on snug, and then you can see the lip is solid on both from the top and the bottom. As I said before, I spilt a little bit of oil on here because I didn't put enough paper towel down, so make sure you put enough, but it wasn't too much, and I guess if anything it just gives it a nice nice shine. Anyways, I'm going to install them and tell you, like I said, it's going to be kind of difficult pushing this one in because like I said, you have to push against that, and probably the same thing against this one. We'll see. Alright, I finger tightened them down most of the way. Like I said, mine's a newer vehicle, so it's probably going to be easier to do than maybe an older vehicle. But this one right here had some problems, and this one also had some problems just because of this lip right here sticking out. But I guess if you used a smaller wrench it would be easy, but mine was a little bit deeper, so I just had to push up against this. It wasn't too bad. Okay, once again, like I said before, make sure you use the proper oil. It's got to be 4-stroke motorcycle oil because apparently the clutch is somehow related to the motor oil, and if you try to use regular car oil, it'll mess up the clutch, and you don't want to do that. Make sure you get one of these and don't be stupid and try to use a piece of paper. Again, I'm supposed to add 3.6 liters. And this is 3.78 liters. So basically almost the whole thing, minus just a small bit. So probably about right there is what you want to leave in there. So anyways, I poured it all in, except for about that much. As you can see, it's right there. So if you level it out about that much, you got 1 liter, 2 liters, 3 liters, and then the rest of it. But anyways, I'm probably just gonna throw that away. Just put the old motor oil inside this one to recycle it. Makes it much easier. Not much you can do with that much oil anyways. And check the dipstick. It's on the other side just to make sure you did it right. Mine was. Dipstick's right here. Like I said, pull it out, wash it off, and then check it. Another good way to know if you got the right amount of oil is when you pour the oil back in to recycle it, see if it adds up to about where it was when you took it out. If it's the same length, minus a little bit, because obviously some of it's still stuck on there and some of it fell on the ATV. So yeah, it's about where it was. So pretty much that's about it. Just gonna have to snap everything back on the way you took it off, put the seat on, and start it up and see if it's got any check engine lights or anything. And then of course, after you ride it for a couple of hours, you might want to check underneath to make sure the bolt is still tight over there, and then you can come over here and see if those bolts are still tight, you know, because if they vibrate loose, you don't want oil spilling everywhere. But if you did the job right, and you know, I've done this enough times, I know how much to tighten stuff down, so I shouldn't have to worry about it. But if you're new to it, you might want to just check it after about 2 or 3 hours of riding.